So PhD is a big step, so we're really excited to see you tonight and for your interest and wanting to be together with us to learn more about the PhD program in counseling psychology and applied human development at the Wheelock College of Education and Human Development at Boston University. So I am here with my colleagues tonight, and we will also have two of our current PhD students. So why don't we'll introduce ourselves first, just my colleagues and students. I would love for all of us to get to know each other a little bit more, but it's probably would take up too much time. So let me welcome all of you. I'm Dr. Tina Durand. I'm a clinical associate professor in counseling psychology and applied human development. I'm on the applied human development side. We're going to talk about why we think it's exciting, actually, that we have a program that melds kind of two very complementary fields. I'm a developmental psychologist, so clinical associate professor and the program director of the PhD program. So good to meet all of you. So I'm going to let my colleagues continue with the introducing themselves. Maria Teresa, do you want to go next, or?
Sure. And hello, everyone. My name is Maria Teresa Coutinho. I'm a clinical associate professor in the Counseling Psychology and Applied Human Development department. I am also director of clinical training for the Counseling Psychology program. So I work very closely with the counseling psych doc students. So it's great to have you here, and hopefully we can answer your questions and pique your interest in our program.
Awesome. Thanks, Maria. Hello, everyone. My name is Gabriel Arredondo. I am the Assistant Director for Recruitment and Admissions here at BU Wheelock. I am also a BU Wheelock alum. I graduated from BU Wheelock in 2018. So kind of just seeing both sides of the college as a graduate student and now as a staff member. So thank you all for joining us here tonight.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you both. So I just scrolled through and I don't see our students yet. They will be joining us, so I will bring them into the conversation. I know they want to share some words with you and some experiences for sure. So why don't we get started? This will be our agenda tonight, and we should expect that more people are going to continue to be joining. Which is fine. We love to see your faces. So if you are comfortable keeping your camera on, that's great, but that's fine if you have your camera off. We're going to do a brief program overview, myself and my colleague, Dr. Coutinho, about the highlights, if you will, of the program, so you have a good understanding of that. Our PhD students will share some wisdom and some insights and some strategies and the things that inspire them as PhD students. Gabriel will give some practical information on the application. We often get lots of questions about the mechanics and the process of the application. And then we'll do question and answers. We are a big group, so we will, you can always be dropping questions into the chat, particularly as you're listening to us, because sometimes, again, you might hear something and then want to make sure you follow up. So feel free to do that. The students will be trying to answer questions. Gabe will also be trying to answer questions in the chat. So feel free to drop questions into the chat, but we'll try to do that together. We won't be able to get to everybody, but we will do the best that we can together with answering your questions tonight. So let's start with just an overview of the program. Again, we are a Department of Counseling, Psychology, and Applied Human Development. When you apply, and you'll see this on your application, and you should already be thinking about this, you are going to select one of those, we call them specializations, right? So if you are interested in counseling psychology, i.e. the field that is really leans into mental health and wellness, health psychology, really across the lifespan, and in counseling and clinical, right, avenues. That's your counseling psychology focus. Applied human development is the developmental focus, looking at development throughout the lifespan, particularly in applied context. So we are an applied program. So those are the kind of distinctions, but of course they're complementary. And the fact that we're complementary, we celebrate that by having a program that brings both of those related disciplines, if you will, together. And it's really lovely that our students, regardless of what specialization they choose, they do get to know each other, and they share in their learning and their thinking and their work in many ways. But when you start the program, you have core courses, and it's really lovely to have students in both specializations sharing many of those courses. So many of your research courses will be shared. We have a selection of courses in psychological foundations, so foundational kind of core knowledge, if you will, in applied psychology. And it's really lovely to have students from both specializations together, collaborating, thinking together, doing projects together, making plans together. So we think that's a strength of our program, for sure, that kind of more interdisciplinary focus. Within either specialization, you will choose a concentration, if you will, either child and adolescent development, or and mental health, or sport and performance psychology. So we have those kind of, within those two kind of broad specializations are concentrations. We usually know, I know many of you have been communicating with me, with other faculty. Students that are interested, particularly in sport, usually know that at the outset. They have a background in sport. Their master's perhaps has been in sport. They've worked with teams, they work with coaches. So it's something that you usually will be thinking about, and we've been communicating about, for sure. Regardless of our the specialization that you choose, our department is really intentional, and we're always growing and thinking about this. And our focus as scholars, as researchers, as teachers, as practitioners, as clinicians, is really thinking about equity and thinking about systems of oppression, and privilege and structural inequity. And how do we, as a BU Wheelock community, how do we work together in communities, really wanting to maximize the trajectories of individuals and families and communities, with a strengths-based perspective, and certainly with a culturally sensitive practice. So that's something that we're very mindful about, and really frame our program around, for sure. So thinking about, that's the kind of broad, conceptualization of who we are as a program. The length and some more details about the practical components. On average, and this is typical of most PhD programs, on average, the program's completed in 5 years. On average, we've had students that have completed it in 4 years. Much of that depends on perhaps what kind of dissertation you choose to do, right? If you're collecting your own data, et cetera. Sometimes it can take longer. We've had students that take 6 years. I'll tell you about the contingencies around that as well. But on average, the program is meant to be completed in 5 years. It's a cohort-based model. So the cohorts are small. So our students get to know each other, but you get really close with your cohort. So cohort sizes are between 5 and 7 students. So that's very different than a PsyD program, I'm understanding, which are very large classes and larger cohorts. So there's an intimacy, there's a community to it. That's a support system. I have all the first-year students this semester in one of our core psychological foundations courses, History and Systems of Psychology, and they are a support. They have a chat, like they are a support for each other. All the cohorts are, but it's a lovely dimension of a PhD program, and certainly in ours. In terms of what you'll be doing, the majority of your coursework is completed in your first several years. The majority of your coursework. For counseling psychology, and my colleague, Dr. Coutinho, is going to talk more about your practica in the counseling psychology specialization. You begin your foundational practicum in year 2. Year 2 is a very intense year. There's a lot going on because you have most of your classes, and now you're taking on your first practicum experience. You, as part of the program, before the dissertation, you complete what we call 2 qualifying tasks that show that you have competency, right, and an initial mastery, right, of your area of interest and your disciplinary and scholarly focus. So the tasks are, the first one is an empirical study, so a research study that you have conducted. That can come from your mentor. So you're already, right, by perhaps year 3 working on projects, several projects, right? So that can come out of your mentor's work, but we have students that have fresh ideas. That's what we want to inspire. So that's the first task, and you would write that up. And the second task is an oral task. So you would present a case orally. There are different choices for AHD students and counseling students. For counseling psychology students, that will be a case conceptualization presentation, which is part of your training. So those are before the dissertation proposal. And again, those are really meant to establish that you have a solid grounding, right, in your discipline area of interest. I think different PhD programs do that in different ways. My PhD, as is Dr. Coutinho's, is from Boston College. And we had a 3-day series of exams. So intensive, we called them comps or comprehensive exams. So that was a different way that we showed those competencies. I think there's pros and cons. This is more applied. This maybe lends itself better to you're already doing work, perhaps, that you can build on into your dissertation. There's pros and cons to it, but yet with the exams, you kind of had it over like in a week, but you were studying for weeks before that. So, but we use the qualifying task model. The dissertation proposal and defense is in the later years, in years 4 or 5. So remember, again, in a PhD program, really research is a very strong focus. So really contributing to the scholarly conversation that's already happening, right? So research is a social process. So this is a process of you figuring out where am I going to enter this conversation and how am I going to contribute in an exciting way. And the dissertation is, we can talk a little bit more about that if there's questions, but the dissertation is a study and a write-up of a very intensive and comprehensive engagement, right, with research and people and ideas, right, that you are going to bring together. We can talk about the components of a dissertation, but that's kind of further down the line. But it's a process that is meant to be celebratory. It's a hard process, but a PhD program is definitely a commitment, right? It's a years-long commitment, so it has to be the right timing. It's a space for you to grow and develop, and to really, I say this to students, to fall in love with research and really get excited about contributing. So a few other specifics. As I said, we expect that the program in general is completed for 5 years, and there's a practical dimension to that. Our PhD is fully funded for 5 years. Okay, so that means all of your tuition for all of your courses, okay, and all of the credits that you have to enroll in, a 12-month service stipend, which is very exciting. My understanding is not all PhD programs offer 12 months. Sometimes it's actually, when I started here, it was only a 9-month stipend. So it is a 12-month stipend, and that includes health insurance. So what does that stipend mean, right? So that means that you are, it's a service stipend, and that is 20 hours a week in some combination of research, and that's really your research mentorship. So that's when you're working as a research assistant with your primary mentor, and it can be 2 mentors too. We can talk more about that. And then teaching and the opportunity to serve as a teaching fellow, a teaching assistant, or even to lead a class if you know you want that experience. That's also part of your training, and we build that in as you progress through your years here. So that's, so again, it's a lot. So you have your courses, right? Your 20-hour-a-week stipend, which again, the service component is when you are getting a lot of your research training. You're working with your mentor, you're collecting data, you're doing literature reviews, you're coding data, you're inputting data, you're again examining the literature, all of the things. Many of you perhaps have already worked perhaps in your master's program or even in your undergrad in a research lab, right? So you will be engaged in research in an ongoing way. You will be assigned a primary research mentor upon admittance, and that is part of our criteria. We have, it's wonderful that we have usually more than 200 applicants for about 6 spots per year. So it's highly competitive. There are so many people that are qualified, overqualified, all of you are, but we have to make choices. And some of those choices do come down to the particular fit, the actual areas of interest that our faculty are engaged in, and how you are presenting to us, if you are a good match for a faculty member in terms of if your interests align, right, with our faculty. So it's not a random process who you end up being connected with, and it's not random. It is part of our selection process. We do encourage you in your application. I know there's several essays you have to write, an equity, diversity, inclusion statement, a personal statement, and then I believe a writing sample. But in your personal statement, do mention what faculty you think that your interests align with. Go right ahead and mention that. I think that I'm really excited about Dr. Coutinho's work because I think my background is a great match, my experiences. So do say that, do mention that. We're reading carefully for that anyway, but it's even more helpful when you help us to attend to those things as well. So, okay, so I am going to now transition to Dr. Coutinho, and she's going to tell you a little bit more about a core component of the counseling psychology specialization and your clinical training.
Yeah, so I think one of the big differences between the AHD and the CP, the counseling psych specialization, is the clinical training. And our counseling psych program is accredited by the Commission on Accreditation of APA, the American Psychological Association. So what that means really is that our program meets certain standards, which typically makes it easier for people to then become licensed as health service psychologists. So that's really important if you're somebody who is interested in having clinical work as part of your work as you sort of go out into the real world once you're done with the PhD. So there are some requirements for that. So in terms of the clinical training, you are required to have a minimum of 4 credits of practicum in the 2nd and 3rd years of the program. And that's fulfilled through the foundational practicum, which is a year-long course, and then advanced practicum, which is the 3rd year course. And what that means with each of those practicums also is doing 16 to 24 hours a week of clinical placement, and I'll talk more a little bit that. A lot of our students also opt to do, so those are the required courses, those two years of practicum. And then students also have the option of doing a 4th year, which is the externship, which again, typically is also 16 to 24 hours of a week of clinical placement. And the credits for those, for the externship kind of varies. And that's something that typically people are talking with their advisor around what makes sense for them. And lastly, so the culmination of the clinical training that you receive is the APIC internship, which is a full-time clinical training position. It typically happens in the 5th or sometimes 6th year of our program. It's a very competitive match process. So it's a national process. So people are applying, different regions in the US and also Canada, actually. Um, and, um, and as director of clinical training, I kind of provide support as you're applying for that. And so usually folks are um, in their 5th year, sort of away from the BU and sort of completing that training. For you to apply for internship, you do have to have your dissertation proposal defense completed, as well as having had all of your coursework done, in addition to having sort of these clinical hours that you need that you earn through practicum um, to be ready for that. So if we could go to the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about the kinds of placements. So these are some of the practicum placements for our current students. So Boston Behavioral Medicine is a private practice based out of Boston. BU Behavioral Health Services is the BU College Counseling Center. We have folks who are at Boston Children's Hospital, Harvard University College Counseling, McLean Hospital. The VA, the Boston VA as well. So our students are, and there's a process. You have to apply, you have to be selected for these positions. So, and these are really coveted placements, and our students have been able to get these placements and actually do really, really well. And the next thing that I wanted to mention also, if you want to go to the next slide, are sort of the places where our students have landed over the last few years for internship. Like I said, these are so the internship process is very competitive. Um, Typically we recommend that our students also look for APA accredited internship placements. Again, just like our program has gone through an accreditation process, these internship sites also have done that. And so that means that they're sort of really meeting the standards for practice and for training for health service psychology. So, and again, what this is just like, it makes it much easier for folks as they're looking for, as they're applying for licensure. It across the country makes things easier. So we have folks who have finished at Advocate Illinois Medical Center, Colorado State University at their College Counseling Center, Harvard Medical School, at CHOP in Orange, California. So, so a lot of great placements as well. And I think that speaks to the kind of training that our students are getting here in the program. All right.
That's a great point, Maria Teresa. And just to think about, again, if we can brag a little bit as a program, like just thinking about, we were just documenting, what our students were doing after graduation. And it's true. I mean, that we've got students that are at very prestigious, right, coveted postdoctoral positions. students that have secured tenure line faculty positions, students that are, working in really exciting clinical, right, and community-based
Right.
counseling programs, students that are working as research scientists for nonprofits. So we've, it's really exciting. It's really exciting. So to see the places, as you say, in the real world. And it does feel like when you're in a PhD, it's a lot of your life and you have to balance that with all of the things, but it's a big part of what you're doing. I just actually was meeting with PhD students today, and they just got married, and they said, "Oh, we haven't even gone away. Like, he's in a postdoc. I'm doing my dissertation. Like, no, we're still like it takes over everything, but you do feel like you are in this kind of place where you're learning and growing, and it's intense while you are in it. But so I think that was interesting that you were saying like in the real world, but it's we're excited to see a lot of things happening as well for our students.
Yeah. And I see that there's a question about, on average, how many students get into APA credit. So our program has been accredited since 2016, and I would say that we haven't had anybody go to a non-accredited APA program. I don't think. I can check to be sure, but I'm pretty sure that pretty much all of our students have ended up in APA accredited internship placements.
Which is great, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I see that one of our third year students, Adine, has joined us. Adine, let me find you. I'm kind of scrolling through here. I like to see people when they're talking. So Adine, thank you for joining us tonight. Nikki might be joining us as well, but Adine, what would you like to share? I know you're just dropping in. Welcome. It's been a long day. Thank you for giving us time tonight. So we just kind of went over all of the program, and Adine is on the Applied Human Development concentration. So Adine, what do you think is, when you think about like being your third year, right? Yeah, okay. When you think about being like, what's important for applicants to know now?
I think the research match is the most important thing in the application process.
Okay.
So, and be able to communicate what you could bring further to the lab, the work that for the person you're aiming to work with. I think it's also about the interest matching, and then also what you can further for the next 5 years and do with that same topic in mind.
I think you're right. Like, just speaking as a faculty member, because again, with 200 applications, it's hard to, there's so many rich experiences that people have had, but we are looking again for your authentic interest in research. And, research starts with questions and being curious, and be thinking about that. What questions are you interested in exploring? For sure, that's a big part of the application because it's a PhD program. So yeah, and really being able to articulate that. You don't have to know all of it, right? That's what you may think, I know I have a global kind of general interest, but as specific as you can be, just put it out there and share what you're thinking about. And as Adine said, like that, again, hopefully that will resonate. And Adine, you got another question, right? Can you share some of your experience in the AHD program?
Yeah, of course. Do you want in a specific way, like in a specific area of my experience, or just my with courses? Okay. So for AHD and CP and the CP students, the courses do change after the first 2 years.
Yeah.
My experience with the courses tends to be more research methods, and I typically do like those because that's where my interest is also in. I do like the first 2 years with the courses because we get a time to spend with the CP students, getting to know more about the topics that shape both of our tracks. And I typically like them. I think there's a good amount of review regarding some of the topics that you'll need to know for your practicum and your research, and then also expanding on some of the areas that you would want to grow on in your doctoral studies.
Adine actually works in a pretty large lab with Dr. Kathleen Corriveau. So, so not all of our students have, again, your experiences with research mentors and labs is going to be diverse. So Adine works in a lab where they do social cognitive work. And the lab has undergraduates and postdoctoral researchers, right, Adine? So what's it like being part of such a big lab, Adine? Do you feel like every year it's felt different?
Yeah, definitely. Definitely my first year, it felt overwhelming because you don't know where you fit in terms of the big machine. And I think that the best thing you could do for yourself if you're entering a similar situation is to advocate for what you need going forward to be successful in the program. I've also learned that being a mentee is also asking for what you need, and that will look different from each student in your cohort and also each student in your lab. Yeah, so doing that, and then as I've gotten to be the most senior grad student in my lab now, which is kind of scary as a third year, you kind of build your own confidence and realize that, you get more confident that you are in charge of your career going forward and what you want that to look like, and saying no to the things that maybe just don't fit with your interests or you can't fit on your plate, which will happen. And then saying yes to the things that excite you and leaning into those and letting those shape your interests and your experience here.
Well said, Adine. And as you said, like you're kind of finding and seeing that you can lead also. And I'll just share that Adine we submitted, there's a conference that many of us in developmental go to. It's called Society for Research and Child Development. And Adine chaired a paper session and you submitted your proposal. So that means she's pulling the proposal. She's really taking a lead role there with other people all across the country. So, right. So you got your proposal all uploaded, right?
Yes, yeah. So that was a stressful situation. But yeah, no, Tina is right. That was a whole new endeavor for me as a third year student, and being the chair of your own symposium submission. No one, and like there's some hidden curriculum to everything in grad school. So really relying on the people in your lab, the people who came before you, and also people like Tina here and your PI as well to help you guide that process and what are the norms to that have been really helpful for me. I originally thought I would just wait to be invited to be for a symposium, but a lot of things you just got to go do it yourself. And so that's what I did this year.
Great, great. So I see that Nikki just joined us, so let's let Nikki have a chance to just settle in. And I see that Emily asked a question about sharing more about the analytical essay in the application. And thank you, Gabe. I think you dropped in, right, the kind of verbiage about what that essay can, what might constitute that. So all of the things that are in there, again, it can be, I don't want to say convenient, but it lends itself nicely if you're in your master's or you have already, again, written many times for a research methods course. Perhaps you have to actually write even a proposal. You've had to do a literature review. Perhaps you've done, even as an undergraduate, an honors thesis, right? So a substantive piece of writing that you've already done always works very well. And, I haven't, we've had students, this is more rare, but if they have been an author on a publication, that's more rare. So don't hear that as, oh no, I have no publications. That's what you will be doing as a doctoral student. So you don't need that. But if by chance you have a conference paper that, even a conference, I'm trying to think of if we've read a conference paper submission. I'm not sure, but most commonly I would say it would be a literature review, a paper perhaps written for like a research methods class. Maria Teresa, do you have any? I'm trying to think of other examples.
No, I mean, I think those are really
Yeah,
good
yeah.
examples.
Right. We're
I
trying,
think-
your writing is going to, you know, writing gets better the more you do it. And mastering scholarly writing is a convention of sorts, so you will get better doing it. But we're trying to get a sense of your critical thinking and your writing abilities. And again, knowing that they're only going to get better, right? We know that, and we know that, so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also saw there's some Q&A. There's a couple of questions about like internship and practicum.
Yeah.
So so one of the questions from Florian Joseph is there practicum opportunities to work in sport performance related environment? Yes, there are. Both doctoral students can do a sport practicum, and there's a course that you would take with that. And also some of our clinical practicums also offer some sport psych experience